Water is essential to all life. Aside from the declining source of energy, water also continually diminishes. In such case, we need to understand, appreciate, value, and care for the processes occurring in the hydrosphere. Specifically, by the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain the processes occurring in the hydrologic cycle, enumerate the role of the hydrosphere as Earth's subsystem, and appreciate, value, and care for the water budget. The movement of water around Earth's surface and its subsystem is called the hydrologic cycle. There are pathways to which water undergo, allowing it to move around the planet in its three states. These pathways are highly driven by the heat from the sun through exogenic process. We can start from the hydrologic cycle by means of evaporation and transpiration. These similar terms happen when water turns from liquid to gas. Evaporation happens to exposed waters, while transpiration occurs as a part of plants' natural photosynthetic process. Sublimation is a direct transformation of ice water from high elevated areas into water vapor. Sublimation happens as a result of low pressure in an area, which significantly alters the evaporation rate of water. As water undergoes evaporation, it rises up in the atmosphere, and as altitude increases, atmospheric pressure decreases. This allows water vapor to undergo condensation or the transformation of vapor into liquid. Deposition occurs when vapor, due to the lack of heat, transforms it directly into solid or ice. Precipitation occurs as rain from condensation and snow from deposition as they fall back to the Earth's crust. At this point, water flows from high elevated areas and eventually returns to the lower ground for storage in freshwater reservoir or saltwater reservoir. Water may infiltrate the soil to be stored as underground water. Earth's water budget is where water mostly resides. The ocean is the largest water reservoir, which stores salt water for a long period of time, while freshwater reservoir remains the least amount of water in storage. Matatandaan na ang freshwater ang kinakailangan ng tao, hayop, maging ang mga halaman upang mabuhay. 3% sa total na water budget ang freshwater, at sa 3% nito ay 0.5% lamang ang nabibilang sa surface water o ang tubig na accessible sa mga halaman, hayop, at sa atin na mga tao. Water may be stored in a span of a few hours up to thousands of years. This time spent by water molecule in a reservoir is called the residence time. Ito rin ang dahilan kung bakit nasabi ng pinakapuro at pinakamalinis na fresh water ay matatagpuan sa mga glaciers ng polar ice caps. There are two types of water reservoir. The first one is called saltwater reservoir and the other, you guessed it, freshwater reservoir. Saltwater reservoir include seas, gulfs, bays, and straits. The largest saltwater reservoir are the oceans, in which saltiness of water significantly varies, affecting the overall climate of the land masses they surround. In the first place, what causes oceans to be salty? If you recall weathering process and volcanic eruptions from previous lessons, our planet is naturally filled with minerals. When volcanoes erupt, lava brings along minerals on the Earth's surface, and during weathering process, minerals go to lower grounds. These minerals meet water during runoff, during which minerals get dissolved. Most of the elements contained by minerals dissolved in water are sodium, potassium, and sulfur, which are salt-forming substances. Salinity of water reservoir is also affected by the hydrologic cycle itself. The higher the evaporation rate, the more water is removed, thus making saltwater reservoir become saltier. While higher the precipitation rate, more water is introduced, which decreases the salinity of the saltwater reservoir. Some other factors also affect the salinity of oceans. This includes the introduction of salt water and groundwater to saltwater reservoir, which decreases its salinity. Temperature also affects the salinity. In areas where seawater approaches freezing levels, Salt minerals separate themselves from the solidification process water undergo to become ice. This process in turn increases the salinity of the remaining salt water from the reservoir. Sa hinabahaba na rin ng panahon, maraming mineral na ang naipon ng dagat na siyang dahilan kung bakit gayon na lamang ang alat nito. We mentioned earlier that oceans also significantly affect the climate. How exactly do oceans affect weather and climate? Similar to the laws of thermodynamics, warm water rises and cold water sinks. Surface water includes the depth of 1 to 100 meters below sea level. In between 100 meters to 1,500 meters is called the thermocline, in which water temperature drastically decreases. The deep zone is 1,500 meters and deeper, where temperature of the surrounding water is uniformly low. The drastic drop in temperature in the deep zone and the difference in the amount of heat received by the poles and the equator give rise to the thermohaline cycle. Thermohaline cycle is driven by the differences in density brought about by the sudden temperature changes and the salinity of the ocean itself. Habang mas lumalamig ang tubig, mas tumataas ang density nito. Dagdag pa ang mga mineral na kahalo rito. Oceans near the equator is less saline than those parts of the ocean near the pole. But due to the heat differences, warm water from the equator seeks the coldness of the poles, and at the same time, high saturation of salt from the poles seek the low saturation of salt near the equator. As salt, temperature, and densities flow, they affect the air temperature above, thus affecting weather and climate. In addition, the movement of ocean currents are also in sync with the motion of the air above it. Water and air move in a clockwise motion in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere. This movement allows the prevailing winds to further distribute heat or breeze in across continental land masses. Again, this is where we can observe the interaction of subsystems being interdependent to one another. Without this interaction, the climate we experience today would have been much different if this interaction did not exist. Areas near the equator would fry due to the concentration of heat, and life wouldn't be possible with further absence of heat circulation near the poles. Sa madaling salita, dahil sa mineral na taglay ng mga karagatan, ay mas napapabilis at napapadali ang pangongolekta at pamamahagi ng enerhiya sa iba't ibang bahagi ng mundo. The second storage of water is the freshwater reservoir. Glaciers and ice sheets are permanent storage of fresh water. Through accumulation of snow and crystallization due to compaction of water, fresh water supply is assured as it stays locked up and safely stored for many years to come. As more water turns to ice during glaciation, the sea level becomes less, which paves way for more coastal lands to be exposed. Due to global warming, however, the opposite happens. As more glacier melts, the sea level increases, which reduces coastal areas, and to make things worse, the lesser becomes for our freshwater reserve. Aside from the ice sheet, on the other hand, we also have permafrost, which are ice but located underground. Permafrost are frozen freshwater trapped for several years in soil, rocks, or sediments. Surface water reservoirs are moving bodies of water in which every channel is interconnected as rivers or streams. Surface water is accumulated from water runoff due to the pull of gravity in drainage basins or watersheds. Located under surface water reservoir are groundwaters. Underground water is the largest reservoir of liquid fresh water on Earth. Groundwater is stored in aquifers or water-bearing rock layers. The amount of water held by aquifers depend on the crack or the porosity of rocks, while permeability is the ability of rocks to allow water to pass through it. Zone of aeration refers to areas in the aquifers that is filled with air ready to be occupied by water, while the zone of saturation are pores filled with water. The boundary between these zones is called water table. We mainly access this water reservoir using pumps or wells. Malaki ang pakinabang natin dito sapagkat ito ang pinakamadaling mapagkukuhanan ng tubig na hindi kinakailangan pa ng ibayong paglilinis at enerhiya. Ngunit dahil sa polusyon, nagbabanta din ang mga ito na mag-ipon hindi ng malinis na tubig kundi kontaminado at nakakalasong likido. Eventually, at some point in time, fresh water will get mixed up with salt water, bringing with it more minerals as they converge in the ocean. Going back to the water budget, the amount of fresh water really is scarce. Water as a resource may not be enough as population continually inflates. We will have greater demands for resources, we will need to have more factories and industries to build, as well as cities and farmlands to occupy. Mining, urban growth, waste generation, climate change, and global warming impact the potability and availability of water. This time, we also have emerging technologies and laws supporting the conservation, management, and protection of our water resource. Desalination in Middle East, water treatment, and laws such as Clean Water Act, just to name a few. Sa huli, ang tubig ay isa sa maraming bagay kung bakit buhay ay nasa daigdig. Water is a renewable resource, and indeed, it is a vital element for our survival. This is Water Resources in Focus. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and see you again in the next one.